The Arizona heat clung to me like a second skin, even indoors. The air conditioner whirred ineffectively, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of my food processor. Lucas would come into the kitchen and smile. He had always said that the grinding sound reminded him of his lovely wife, the greatest cook in the world. Lucas, my husband. My Lucas, who was halfway across the state, was locked away in the Tucson complex for a crime he swore he didn't commit. 3 years. 3 years of visiting him in that stifling place, the stench of sweat and despair clinging to my clothes for days after. 3 years of pretending our life wasn't teetering on the edge. The doorbell startled me, the shrill sound shattering the carefully constructed image of stoicism I wore for the world. It was usually just the neighborhood children, chasing each other through the narrow lanes, their laughter a bittersweet reminder of the life I yearned for. This time, though, it was Oliver, Lucas's best friend, with his easy smile and the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. We used to be a foursome, Lucas and I, Oliver and his wife, Charlotte. Weekend barbecues, boisterous laughter echoing through the compound, our children tumbling through the grass in a chaotic symphony of joy. Now, Charlotte had left, taking their children with her to Canada, leaving Oliver adrift in a sea of his own sorrow. He settled on the sofa, the one Lucas always complained sagged too much. "Just checking in," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. But his hand lingered a beat too long on mine as he passed a bottle of cold beer. We talked. About Lucas, about the injustice of his sentence, about the suffocating heat. But the words were mere scaffolding, hiding the unspoken truth that hung heavy between us. Later, as the Phoenix skyline bled fiery orange into inky purple, we sat on the balcony, the air thick with the scent of night jasmine. My hand brushed against his, sending a jolt of electricity sparking through me. It had been years since I'd felt anything close to desire, my heart a barren field after Lucas's imprisonment. Oliver's fingers intertwined with mine, his touch sending shivers down my spine. We didn't speak, words suddenly superfluous. He leaned in, his lips meeting mine with a tenderness that both surprised and awakened a dormant part of me. The kiss was a confession, a shared grief morphing into something raw and forbidden. Inside, his touch was a map rediscovering forgotten territories. His hands skimmed my skin, sending goosebumps erupting in their wake. We moved with a desperate urgency, fueled by a need that transcended guilt. In the aftermath, tangled in the sheets, a fragile peace settled around us. Shame gnawed at the edges of my stolen joy. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not with Oliver, not with Lucas's best friend. Yet, as I watched him sleep, a calmness I hadn't felt in years washed over me. It wasn't love, not in the way I loved Lucas. This was a different kind of solace, a shared understanding whispered in hushed tones and stolen glances. The following weeks were a tightrope walk. Meetings with Oliver were stolen moments snatched from a suffocating routine. Visits to Lucas at the jail became even more unbearable, his optimism a painful reminder of the life I was betraying. One Saturday, while Lucas was at a prison work program, the doorbell shattered the fragile peace. It was Lucas, a shadow of his former self, his eyes filled with a flicker of hope that turned to ash when he saw Oliver's car parked outside. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. "Lucas," I managed, my voice a hoarse whisper. He didn't answer, his eyes locked on Oliver, who stood frozen by the doorway. The anger on Lucas's face ripped at my heart, a raw mix of betrayal and pain. "I knew there was something," he finally rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "Always something between you two." Oliver stepped forward, wanting to speak, but I silenced him with a gesture. This was my mess, mine to clean up. "Lucas," I began, my voice trembling. "It's not what you think." A laugh, devoid of humor, escaped his lips. "Isn't it?" 3 years, Isabel. 3 years I've been rotting in this hellhole, clinging to the memory of us. And you. He couldn't finish the sentence. The disgust in his eyes a searing indictment. Tears blurred my vision. It started with loneliness, just needing someone to talk to. I didn't mean to betray you. But you did, he said. And it wasn't just loneliness, was it? Lucas's voice cracked, the anger giving way to a raw vulnerability that ripped at my heart. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. The weight of my betrayal hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Looking at Oliver, I saw not a justification, but a stark reminder of the choices I'd made. No, I whispered, the word heavy on my tongue. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the absence of Lucas's touch, the comfort of his presence. It was the fear that gnawed at me for years, the fear that prison might have changed him and hardened him beyond recognition. Oliver reached for my hand, but I pulled away. This was between me and Lucas. I understand, Lucas said, his voice surprisingly calm. In a way, I almost expected it. Tucson Complex does strange things to a man, makes him wonder if he's still worthy of love. His words struck a chord deep within me. Had my actions been a reflection of my own doubts about our love? Did I need Oliver's touch to reassure myself that I was still desirable? But that doesn't make it right, Lucas continued, his voice firming. We need to talk, Isabel. Away from... He trailed off, his eyes flicking towards Oliver. Oliver, understanding the unspoken request, nodded curtly. I'll be outside, he said, a flicker of pain in his eyes. As the door closed behind him, I finally faced Lucas. The man standing before me seemed older, his face etched with the harsh lines of his ordeal. But in his eyes, I still saw the flicker of the man I loved, the man I missed. Let's talk, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. We talked for hours that night, on the same couch where Oliver and I had found solace in betrayal. We talked about the loneliness, the fear, the desperation that had driven me to seek comfort elsewhere. Lucas spoke about the crushing weight of prison, the gnawing uncertainty that had fueled his doubts. As the night wore on, a fragile understanding began to form. Our love, tested by years of separation and hardship, was battered but not broken. We both had made mistakes, succumbed to the darkness that had threatened to engulf us. Could we, after the betrayal and the darkness, rebuild a life together? I didn't have the answer then, but as I looked into his eyes, I saw a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, love, like the night jasmine blooming in the Arizona heat, could find a way to bloom again, stronger and more resilient in the face of adversity.